For years she silently performed her duties, though she dreamed of becoming a doctor. Everything changed when the governor was admitted to the hospital after a car accident. Leslie noticed symptoms that the professor had missed, but no one listened to her. When the patient began to die, she decided to take a risk. Leslie Baker hurriedly tied the laces of her white sneakers. Glancing at the clock in the women's locker room of the regional hospital, she was late again for the morning round. At 26, she had already worked as a nurse in the intensive care unit for 4 years, but still hadn't gotten used to the pace of life dictated by the hospital. Adjusting her white coat and pinning her unruly light brown hair into a strict bun, Leslie quickly walked down the familiar corridor on the second floor. The walls were painted a dull beige, and the linoleum underfoot was cracked from age. But to her, these walls had become home. Here she had lived through the best and worst years of her life. The red diploma from medical school, gathering dust at home in a closet, reminded her of other dreams. Leslie wanted to be a doctor, to enter medical university, to truly heal people. But life had other plans. 3.5 years ago, her parents died in a car crash. Her father's car was crushed like an accordion by an oncoming truck whose driver had fallen asleep at the wheel. After the funeral, Leslie was left alone with her younger sister Catherine, who was only 16 at the time. The girl was in her final year of high school, dreaming of studying philology. The parental pension and small savings would barely last a year. The choice was simple: either both quit school and start working, or Leslie sacrifice her own plans for her sister's future. "Leslie, I don't want you to," Catherine began, but her older sister stopped her. "I don't want to hear anything. You will study. One of us has to have a normal life." That's how Leslie ended up in the ICU of the regional hospital. The nurse's salary was small but steady. Plus, night shifts brought in extra money. Besides, working in the hospital allowed her to stay connected to medicine, though not in the way she had planned. In the evenings, while Catherine did her homework at the kitchen table of their 2-room apartment on the city outskirts, Leslie sat nearby with medical manuals and textbooks. She read about new treatment methods, studied rare syndromes, and learned pharmacology. Colleagues sometimes joked, "Our Leslie is like a doctor without a diploma." But jokes aside, Leslie felt invisible. During morning rounds, she stood silently by patients' beds while doctors discussed diagnoses and treatments. Sometimes she had questions or even suggestions, but she knew her place. A nurse follows orders, not gives advice. The head of the ICU, Austin King, was an imposing and important man. At 55, he held a doctoral degree, was a professor, and had the reputation as one of the best intensivists in the region. People feared and respected him. Leslie remembered how once a young resident tried to argue with the professor about a drug dosage, and Mr. King scolded the young man so harshly that he nearly cried right there in the ward. Leslie's patients liked her. She was attentive, patient, and always found time to listen and encourage. An old mechanic, Uncle Jake, who was recovering from a heart attack, once said, "You, dear, are kinder than many doctors. Your hands are golden." Leslie only smiled in response. Kindness is good, but you can't make diagnoses with kindness. Entering the ICU room, Leslie immediately noticed unusual activity. Today was a special day. A very important patient was expected. Since morning, Chief Physician Gregory Flores nervously paced the corridors, checking the readiness of the wards. Even the cleaners had been instructed to wipe all surfaces extra carefully. "Where have you been?" asked head nurse Molly sternly. "The governor of the region is being admitted today. The injuries are severe. A medical board is convening to make sure everything is perfect." Leslie nodded and began checking the equipment in ICU room number 3, reserved for the special patient. Heart rate monitors, ventilator, oxygen supply system, everything had to work flawlessly. Outside, a light autumn rain was falling. Leslie wiped the dust off the windowsill and carefully arranged small potted violets there. She brought them from home for all the wards, believing that live flowers helped patients recover faster. The doctors laughed at this but didn't object. Catherine was already in her second year at the philology faculty. Her scholarship covered only transportation and lunches at the university. Leslie had to provide the rest. Catherine worked part-time as a language tutor, helping school children prepare for exams. Sometimes Leslie looked at her sister and thought that she hadn't sacrificed her plans in vain. Catherine was blossoming at university. She had friends, interests, even a boyfriend, a sweet student from the history faculty. "Leslie, when will you enroll in university yourself?" Catherine sometimes asked. "Later," Leslie replied. "First you graduate and get a job." "But you're only 26. You have your whole life ahead of you." Leslie just shrugged. Sometimes, lying awake at night after a tough shift, she dreamed of getting into medical school, becoming a surgeon or a therapist. But in the morning, she would wake up, see the utility bills and Catherine's textbooks on the table, and her dreams would be postponed. Every day in the ICU was much like the last: morning rounds, procedures, monitoring patients' conditions, filling out paperwork. Leslie did her job conscientiously, but without much enthusiasm. She knew she was capable of more, but circumstances had turned out this way. Her colleagues treated her well. Leslie was quiet, unobtrusive, never argued or schemed. Sometimes at staff parties, doctors would say, "Our Leslie is gold, not just a nurse, quiet as a mouse but knows her stuff." Leslie would smile and stay silent. Being a mouse was safe. By noon, preparations for the arrival of the special patient were complete. Room number 3 sparkled with cleanliness. The equipment had been checked twice. Leslie changed into a fresh coat and began to wait. It was interesting to see the regional governor, a man shown on TV whose decisions affected millions of people's lives. What was he like in everyday life, when he wasn't giving speeches from a podium? Time passed slowly. Leslie reviewed in her mind everything she knew about injuries from car accidents. After her parents' death, this subject had become especially painful for her. She had studied numerous articles on polytrauma, fractures, and internal bleeding. This knowledge was mostly theoretical, but who knew, maybe it would come in handy someday. The violets on the windowsill quietly bloomed under the gray autumn light. Life went on as usual. Leslie had no idea that today would change not only her fate but also show everyone that even the quietest mouse could turn out to be the most important in the pack. The sound of an ambulance siren shattered the post-lunch silence of the hospital at 3:15. Leslie flinched and put aside the medical chart she was filling out. Hastened footsteps, the sound of a stretcher, and anxious voices were heard in the corridor. "Is the third box ready?" someone from the ICU shouted. Within minutes, a stretcher with a patient was brought into the room. Leslie immediately recognized the familiar face, the regional governor, Kyle Adams, a 53-year-old man, somewhat overweight, with receding hair and a neatly trimmed beard. His face was pale, with a grayish, earthy tint that Leslie had learned to recognize after years in the ICU. "Car accident on the bypass road," the paramedic quickly reported to the young duty doctor, Frank Foster. "Collision with a truck." The patient was strapped in, but the impact was on the right side of the car. He was conscious but complained of severe pain in his abdomen and chest. Systolic blood pressure had dropped to 90, pulse 120. Leslie silently helped transfer the governor from the stretcher to the hospital bed. His breathing was shallow and rapid. His suit, a costly one, clearly from a famous Italian designer, was now cut open by the paramedic's scissors. Gold watch sparkled on his left wrist, and a wedding ring adorned his ring finger. Where's the x-ray? Where are the blood tests? Professor Austin King, head of the department, entered the room. Behind him came a whole entourage: Chief Physician Mr. Flores, 2 residents, and head nurse Molly. All faces were tense and serious. Austin King, the images are being taken, blood samples taken, the duty doctor reported. Leslie stepped aside, watching the doctors examine the patient. The governor was conscious but clearly in severe pain. His face contorted in grimaces each time Mr. King palpated his abdomen. The ribs on the right side were possibly broken. The abdomen was tense and painful. There was suspicion of a spleen rupture. The professor dictated his observations to a resident who hurriedly wrote them down in a chart. Leslie watched the patient carefully. Something troubled her, but she couldn't figure out what exactly. The skin color. Yes, not just paleness from pain and shock. The skin had a specific yellowish tint at the temples and neck. And the breathing. The governor was breathing too frequently and shallowly, as if each deep breath caused additional pain. Leslie, connect the monitor, the head nurse ordered. While Leslie was attaching the electrodes, the governor suddenly groaned loudly and tried to turn onto his side. It hurts. It hurts a lot, he said with difficulty between breaths, as if something was pressing from inside. Don't move, Kyle Adams. We're going to give you a painkiller now, Professor King soothed him. Leslie fixed the last electrode and looked at the monitor. The pulse was indeed rapid, 118 beats per minute. Blood pressure dropped even more, 85/55. Blood oxygen was at the lower limit of normal. A lab technician rushed into the room with test results. Hemoglobin dropped to 110. Leukocytes elevated. ESR 35, he quickly recited the figures. There is internal bleeding, Mr. King stated. Prepare for surgery. Most likely a rupture of the spleen or liver. X-ray images were brought in. The doctors leaned over the glowing screen of the negatoscope, discussing the visible rib fractures and possible internal organ damage. Leslie stood beside the patient's bed, continuing to monitor his condition. The governor kept grimacing from pain. His hands involuntarily reached toward his abdomen. What's your name? He suddenly asked, looking at Leslie. Leslie, she answered quietly. Thank you for helping, he said with difficulty, but sincerely. You're welcome. The main thing is for you to get better. The governor tried to smile, but a grimace of pain immediately distorted his face. Something was wrong. Breathing was difficult, and his abdomen seemed to be swelling. Leslie became alert. A swelling abdomen. She carefully looked at the contours of the patient's abdomen beneath the hospital gown. Indeed, the abdomen appeared somewhat distended, especially in the upper part. Meanwhile, the doctor's counsel continued their discussion. Clear picture of polytrauma, rib fractures, possible lung injury. In the abdomen, spleen rupture, hence the bleeding, summarized Professor Mr. King. We'll start preparing for laparotomy. Leslie wanted to say something but stayed silent. She found it strange that the doctors spoke so confidently about a spleen rupture without conducting additional tests. The ultrasound was done very quickly, and no CT scan was ordered, apparently to save time. She recalled a case she had studied 6 months ago while preparing for an emergency care exam. A patient with similar symptoms, but the cause was quite different: abdominal compartment syndrome. What was it called? Leslie, help me turn the patient for an additional image, the resident called out. When they carefully turned the governor onto his side, he cried out in pain. Oh, it feels like something is bursting inside. Leslie noticed that when the patient's body position changed to lying on his back, small red dots appeared, petechiae. That was odd. Such a rash does not occur with a typical spleen rupture. Abdominal compartment syndrome. That's what it was called. Leslie had read about it in an American medical journal that one of the young surgeons had brought to the hospital. A rare but very dangerous condition that develops after abdominal trauma. She looked at the doctors, who continued discussing the operation plan. Should she say something? But who was she? A nurse without a medical degree. Professor Mr. King had 30 years of surgical practice behind him, and she had just finished nursing school. Kyle Adams, how is your urination? Do you feel like going? The attending physician asked, bringing Leslie back to reality. No, not at all. And that's strange. I drank a lot of coffee this morning. Leslie felt her heart race. Lack of urination, abdominal swelling, specific pains, petechiae on the skin, all pointed to abdominal compartment syndrome. A condition requiring immediate decompression, not laparotomy. Professor Mr. King, she began timidly. What is it, Miss Baker? He turned to her with some irritation. Maybe we should do an additional test. Kidney ultrasound. Measure intra-abdominal pressure. Mr. King frowned. Miss Baker, we are holding a consultation, not an anatomy lesson. The patient's clinical picture is clear. Better focus on preparing for the operation. Leslie blushed and stepped back, but the unease didn't leave her. She continued to observe the governor, noting the slightest changes in his condition. The patient became increasingly restless. His skin took on a more pronounced yellowish tint. His breathing became even more shallow. I'm worse. Much worse, he whispered when Leslie came to check the floor. Hang in there, Kyle Adams, you're going to surgery soon. No, you don't understand, he said. Something's wrong. This pain from the fracture is unusual. It's like I'm being inflated from inside, like a balloon. Leslie glanced at the monitor. The pulse rose to 125, blood pressure dropped even further, 80/50. Oxygen saturation was decreasing, although the patient was connected to oxygen supply. A nurse from the operating room entered the ward. Austin King, the OR is ready. We can start. Excellent. Leslie, help with transport. As the stretcher was being wheeled out of the room, Leslie noticed something else. The governor's abdomen had noticeably increased in size over the past 2 hours, and the skin over his belly had become tight and shiny. All signs pointed to abdominal compartment syndrome. Leslie was almost certain of it. But the surgery had already begun. The doctors would open the abdominal cavity searching for a damaged spleen, while the real cause of the patient's condition would go unnoticed. Leslie returned to the ward and started tidying up. Her thoughts were tangled. On one hand, who was she to doubt the diagnosis of experienced doctors? On the other, what if she was right? Abdominal compartment syndrome without proper treatment could lead to death. She grabbed her mobile phone and quickly typed abdominal compartment syndrome symptoms into the search engine. One article after another confirmed her fears. The governor had all the symptoms. The surgery had already been going on for 3 hours. Leslie nervously paced the corridor, glancing at the operating room door. Something was wrong. Usually, a laparotomy for a spleen rupture takes no more than an hour and a half. Finally, around 8 in the evening, the operating room door opened. Professor Mr. King came out, looking puzzled. A strange case, he told the chief doctor. The spleen is intact. A small liver tear, but it doesn't explain the whole clinical picture. There is bleeding, but the source is unclear. Leslie stepped closer, listening to the conversation. Austin King, how is the patient's condition? Stable but not improving. Blood pressure isn't rising, kidney function is reduced. We will monitor in intensive care. When the governor was brought back to the ward, Leslie was horrified. His condition had clearly worsened. His skin had turned an ashen gray, and his breathing was irregular. The monitor readings were alarming. How did the operation go? The patient asked barely audibly. Everything's fine, Kyle Adams. Rest now. But Leslie could see that nothing was fine. The doctors hadn't found the cause of the bleeding and therefore hadn't stopped it, and the abdominal compartment syndrome continued to develop. She looked at the clock. Her shift was almost over, but she didn't want to go home. A premonition of disaster lingered. Something told her that something terrible would happen that night. The next morning, Leslie came to work sleep-deprived. All night she had dreamed of operating room monitors with alarming signals and the governor's face twisted in pain. Waking at 5 a.m., she couldn't fall back asleep. There was unusual activity in the hospital corridor. Reporters were crowding the main entrance, trying to get information about the governor's condition. Leslie slipped in through the service entrance, avoiding the press. Miss Baker, finally, called the head nurse Molly. Urgently to the third ward. The governor had spent a restless night. Leslie quickly changed and hurried to intensive care. The scene she saw confirmed her worst fears. The governor looked significantly worse than the day before. His skin had a pronounced jaundice tint, especially noticeable in the sclera. His breathing was shallow and rapid. "How are you, Kyle Adams?" she asked softly while checking the monitor readings. "Bad, very bad," the governor said with difficulty. "I couldn't sleep all night. It feels like everything inside is swelling. And I haven't gone to the bathroom at all." Leslie looked at the urinary catheter. Over the last 12 hours, there had been very little urine, no more than 200 milliliters. This was a very troubling symptom. "Leslie, what does the monitor show?" asked the attending physician Frank as he approached the bed. "Pulse 130, blood pressure 75/45, oxygen saturation 89%, Leslie reported. "Bad. Very bad. Blood pressure continues to fall." Professor Mr. King entered the room accompanied by 2 residents. His face showed concern. "How is the patient?" he asked sternly. "Condition is worsening, Austin King. Kidneys are barely functioning. Blood pressure is critical." Mr. King frowned and began examining the governor. Leslie stood nearby, watching closely. The patient's abdomen was clearly distended, the skin stretched tight and shiny. The governor moaned in pain upon palpation. "Maybe complications after surgery," the professor mused aloud. "Internal bleeding continues. We need to do a repeat laparotomy." Leslie couldn't hold back. "Austin King, excuse me, but what if it's not bleeding?" Everyone turned to her, and tense silence fell. "What are you talking about, Miss Baker?" Mr. King asked coldly. "I think, or it seems to me, the patient may have abdominal compartment syndrome. Look, abdominal distension, oliguria, jaundice of the sclera, respiratory failure." One of the residents snorted, the other openly smiled. Professor Mr. King looked at Leslie as if she had suggested treating the patient with spells. "A nurse decided to teach professors?" he said sarcastically. "Miss Baker, abdominal compartment syndrome is an extremely rare pathology. Do you even know what it is?" Leslie blushed but did not back down. "I do. It is an increase in pressure within the abdominal cavity above 12 millimeters of mercury, which leads to impaired function of internal organs. After trauma, it can develop due to tissue swelling, internal bleeding, or quite. Mr. King abruptly cut her off. You've been reading American textbooks and now see rare syndromes where there are none. The patient has a classic picture of post-traumatic bleeding. Period. But abdominal pressure can be measured through the urinary catheter, Leslie insisted. Miss Baker, the professor raised his voice, you are crossing the line. Nurses should not make diagnoses. That is the prerogative of doctors. Stick to your direct duties. The residents exchanged smirks. One of them, a young guy with glasses, whispered to the other, Our Leslie is signing up to be a doctor. Leslie lowered her head, feeling her cheeks burn. She knew she was right but couldn't prove it. The professor continued his rounds, ignoring her presence. Prepare the patient for a repeat operation. We need to find the source of bleeding. When the doctors left, Leslie was left alone with the governor. He weakly opened his eyes. What did they say? He asked with difficulty. They're preparing for another operation. Did you say something about a different diagnosis? Leslie fell silent. It was unethical to share her doubts with the patient. I just wanted to make sure all possibilities are considered. You're a smart girl, said the governor. I saw how you watched me yesterday. Carefully. More than some doctors. The governor closed his eyes, exhausted by pain and weakness. The rest of the day passed in anxious anticipation. Leslie could not focus on work, constantly thinking about the governor's condition. In the evening, as her shift was ending, she decided to speak with the head physician once more. Professor Mr. King was sitting in his office, reviewing medical charts. Leslie timidly knocked on the door. Come in. Austin King, sorry to bother you. Miss Baker, what do you need? I wanted to talk once more about the governor. His condition keeps worsening. Maybe we should still consider the possibility of abdominal compartment syndrome? Mr. King's face darkened. Miss Baker, you are not listening to me. I said clearly this morning, diagnoses are made by doctors, not nurses. Do you have a medical diploma? I have surgical practice and a doctoral degree. No, the professor interrupted. Exactly. No. Now listen carefully. Mr. King stood up from his desk, towering over Leslie. If you try again to question my qualifications and the diagnosis of my department, I will write an official reprimand against you for exceeding authority and incompetent interference in the treatment process. You could lose your job. Understood? Leslie nodded, feeling tears well up. And one more thing, the professor added in a softer but still firm tone. Miss Baker, you are a good nurse. Don't ruin your reputation with amateurism. Nurses should follow doctors' orders, not make diagnoses. Leslie left the office feeling defeated. In the corridor, head nurse Molly was waiting for her. So, Smarty, got a reprimand? She asked sympathetically. Molly, what if I'm right? What if the governor really has that syndrome? Leslie, my dear, sighed the head nurse, Mr. King, professor, doctor of sciences. 30 years of practice behind him, and you just graduated from nursing school. You think he's wrong and you're right? But the symptoms. Symptoms are symptoms, but hierarchy is hierarchy. Remember, in the hospital, the chief doctors are in charge, and we assist them. It's not our place to be smart. Leslie went home in a gloomy mood. At home, Catherine was cooking dinner, humming softly. Seeing her sister, she immediately noticed her condition. Leslie, what happened? You look so pale. Had a tough day. Want to talk about it? Leslie told her sister about the governor, her suspicions, and the doctor's reactions. Catherine listened attentively. Are you sure about that syndrome? I think so. All the symptoms match. Then don't give up. If someone's life is in danger and you can help. Catherine, I'm going to get fired. Then where will the money come from? Your studies, rent? Leslie, listen to me. Catherine took her sister's hands. I'm already an adult. If I have to, I'll quit university and get a job. But don't stay silent if you're sure you're right. It's a human life after all. Leslie hugged her younger sister. Her chest warmed from the support, but the decision was difficult to make. That night she couldn't sleep, tossing and turning in bed. Thoughts swirled in her head. On one side, the fear of losing her job, income, and stability. On the other, confidence in the diagnosis and the understanding that time was running out. By morning, Leslie made her decision. She would go to work and try again. Maybe she could find a way to convince the doctors to conduct additional tests or to consult someone else. The main thing was not to remain silent. After all, a human life was at stake, and even if it meant risking her job, her conscience wouldn't let her stay quiet. I'll hold on for one more day, she told herself as she got ready for work. If the governor's condition doesn't improve, I'll find a way to act. Leslie didn't know that this day would become a turning point not only for the governor but for her own fate, and that within 24 hours her name would be known throughout the region. The third day after the accident started badly. Leslie arrived for the morning shift and immediately sensed something was wrong. Doctors were bustling around the governor's ward. Their faces were anxious. What happened? She asked a colleague. He deteriorated sharply during the night. Blood pressure dropped to a critical level. Signs of liver-kidney failure appeared. Leslie peeked into the ward. The governor looked awful. His skin was yellow-gray, breathing was shallow. Alarmingly flashing red numbers on the monitors, blood pressure 60/35, pulse 145. Oxygen saturation barely reached 85%. Leslie, he whispered weakly upon seeing her, I feel very bad. Hang in there, Kyle Adams. The doctors are doing everything they can. I feel like I'm dying. Leslie's heart clenched. The man was fading before her eyes, and she could do nothing. Professor Mr. King looked confused. A second surgery had yielded no results. The source of the problem was still unknown. There was bleeding, but it was minor. The cause of the critical condition remained a mystery. Maybe infectious complications, suggested one resident. Or a thromboembolism, offered another. But none of their assumptions explained the full clinical picture. Leslie silently performed her duties, monitoring the governor's condition. With every hour, he worsened. By noon, he slipped into a stupor, responding only to painful stimuli. We need to start extracorporeal detoxification, Mr. King decided. The kidneys are failing. But Leslie understood this was only supportive therapy. Without eliminating the cause of the intra-abdominal pressure syndrome, no procedure would help. By evening, the situation became critical. The chief doctor visited the governor twice, wore a serious face, and made calls. A rumor spread through the hospital that the patient's relatives were being prepared for the worst. Leslie finished her shift but didn't go home. She stayed by the governor's bedside, changing sensors, checking 4 drips. On the night shift, a young doctor, Bruce Butler, a recent graduate, timid and unsure, took over. At 11 p.m., the governor's condition sharply worsened. He began to delirium. His temperature spiked to 39 degrees Celsius. And that night, the thing Leslie feared most happened. "Nurse, nurse, hurry!" Bruce Butler shouted. "He's bleeding." Leslie rushed into the ward. A dark bloodstain spread across the sheet. The governor was unconscious, pulse steady. Blood pressure on the monitor was almost non-existent. "What do we do? What do we do?" the young doctor panicked. "Call Mr. King, quickly." While the on-duty doctor rushed around, Leslie tried to stop the bleeding by pressing gauze pads against the surgical wound. But the blood kept oozing. Mr. King arrived half an hour later. By that time, the governor was already in critical condition. "Back to the operating room," commanded Professor Austin King. Unexpectedly, Leslie spoke up. "Maybe we should first measure the intra-abdominal pressure through a catheter. The procedure is simple. It will take 2 minutes." "Miss Baker." Mr. King barked. "I warned you. One more word, and you're out of this hospital." The surgery lasted 3 hours. Leslie paced the corridor the entire time, unable to find peace. At 4 a.m., the operating room doors finally opened. Mr. King emerged looking gloomier than a thundercloud. "I don't understand," he told the chief doctor. "We can't find the source of the bleeding. It seems multiple sites are bleeding simultaneously. But why?" The governor was taken to intensive care in extremely severe condition. Leslie looked at the monitor and felt a chill. Systolic pressure, 40, pulse, 160, arrhythmia. The man was dying before her eyes. "Leslie," Molly placed a hand on her shoulder. "Go home. You've been here for over 24 hours. I can't leave him. My girl, you're not a doctor. What can you do?" Leslie stared at the dying governor and suddenly realized she could do what no one else dared. She could break the chain of command, risk her career, but try to save the man. At 5 a.m., when the shift changed and the halls were relatively quiet, Leslie made a decision. She took out her mobile phone and dialed a number she had seen on the notice board a month ago. "Hello, Robert Gray? This is Leslie from the Regional Hospital ICU. Sorry for calling so early." A sleepy voice answered. "Leslie, what's happened?" "Robert Gray, our governor is dying. And I think I know why." Robert Gray was a young surgeon who had recently returned from a 2-year internship in Germany. He was 32 years old and considered a rising star in surgery. Unlike many colleagues, he had no titles and was always willing to listen to junior staff. "Explain," Mr. Gray's voice became attentive. "Intra-abdominal pressure syndrome. All the symptoms are clear: allergy, respiratory failure, liver-kidney failure. The bleeding is secondary due to coagulation disorders caused by increased intra-abdominal pressure." "Have you measured the intra-abdominal pressure?" "No. Professor Mr. King thinks it's nonsense." Silence fell on the other end. "Robert Gray, do you hear me?" "I do." "Leslie, do you understand how serious this is? If I come and start treating Mr. King's patient without his permission—" "I understand, but he is literally dying before our eyes." "Are you sure about the diagnosis?" "Yes. 6 months ago, I read an article by American surgeons about this syndrome. All the symptoms match exactly." Mr. Gray paused for a few more seconds. "All right, I'm coming. Prepare everything for measuring intra-abdominal pressure via urinary catheter and pray we both don't lose our jobs." Leslie put down the phone with trembling hands. She had just taken an action that could cost her career. But the dying governor was more important than any career concerns. She quickly prepared everything needed for the procedure: a manometer, saline solution, syringes. Her heart was pounding so loudly it seemed the whole corridor could hear it. Mr. Gray arrived half an hour later. The young surgeon looked worried but determined. "Where's the patient?" "Here." "But Robert Gray, Professor Mr. King." "Mr. King is asleep. And I formally have the right to consult on patients. Let's measure the pressure." The procedure took a few minutes. Mr. Gray connected the manometer to the urinary catheter and slowly infused the saline solution. 25 millimeters of mercury, he noted, with normal being up to 12. "Leslie, you were right. This is abdominal compartment syndrome. What do we do now?" "Emergency decompressive laparotomy. We need to lower the intra-abdominal pressure, or he'll die within hours." "And Mr. King?" "We'll deal with him later. Right now, saving the patient is what matters." Mr. Gray quickly prepared for the surgery. Leslie assisted him, feeling a mix of fear and hope. What would happen when Mr. King woke up and learned about the unauthorized surgery? But that didn't matter now. The only important thing was to give the governor a chance to survive. "Leslie," Mr. Gray said, putting on gloves, "you're a very brave woman and a very smart nurse. I just couldn't watch him die. Let's go save this man." The operation began at 6:30 in the morning. Leslie assisted by handing instruments and monitoring the patient's condition. With each passing minute, she understood more and more that calling Mr. Gray was the only right decision. Time was ticking. Mr. King was due soon for the morning rounds. And that's when things would get interesting. The surgery had been going on for an hour when the familiar firm footsteps of Professor Mr. King echoed down the corridor. Leslie felt her blood run cold. Robert Gray didn't even look up, continuing his work. "What is going on here?" Mr. King's roar thundered throughout the operating room. "Mr. Gray, how dare you operate on my patient without permission?" "Austin King, the patient was dying. Intra-abdominal pressure was 25 millimeters. Classic compartment syndrome," Mr. Gray replied calmly, not stopping his work. "Nonsense. There's no syndrome. And you, Miss Baker?" Mr. King turned to Leslie. "You're fired. Immediately. For gross insubordination." "Austin King, look at the monitor," Mr. Gray said without lifting his eyes from the surgical field. Mr. King reluctantly glanced at the screen. The indicators had indeed started to improve. Blood pressure had risen to 80 millimeters, pulse had dropped to 120, and oxygen saturation had reached 92%. After decompression, the abdominal pressure dropped to normal levels. Urine output tripled. "Liver function tests are beginning to stabilize," Mr. Gray explained. It was indeed compartment syndrome. Mr. King's face turned pale, then flushed red. "That can't be. I couldn't have been wrong. Austin King, everyone makes mistakes. The important thing is to admit them and fix them." By the end of the operation, the governor's condition had significantly improved. Blood pressure stabilized at 110/70, pulse returned to normal. Most importantly, he began regaining consciousness. "What? Where am I?" the governor whispered weakly as they transferred him back to intensive care. "It's all right, Kyle Adams. The crisis has passed," Mr. Gray said. The governor looked at Leslie. "Were you the one insisting on a different diagnosis?" Leslie nodded hesitantly. "Thank you," he whispered and closed his eyes. Mr. King left the operating room without a word. Leslie understood the scandal was only just beginning, but right now she didn't care. The main thing, the governor was alive. An hour later, Chief Dr. Mr. Flores arrived at the hospital. He summoned Leslie and Mr. Gray. "Explain what happened here," he demanded. Mr. Gray detailed the situation, fully acknowledging Leslie's role in making the correct diagnosis. "So what now?" Mr. King demands the nurse be fired for exceeding her authority. "Gregory Flores," Mr. Gray interjected, "this nurse saved the governor's life. Perhaps that fact should be taken into account." "Fine, no one's getting fired for now. We'll sort it out." But events unfolded rapidly. By evening, people from the governor's administration had arrived at the hospital. They demanded explanations for why the governor's condition had remained critical for so long. The chief physician was forced to tell the whole truth, that the nurse was the first to suspect the correct diagnosis, that her opinion had been ignored, and that the young surgeon Mr. Gray had risked his career to save the patient. "So, the governor could have died because of a medical error," clarified a representative from the administration. "Medicine is an inexact science. Diagnostic errors happen, but here the nurse made the correct diagnosis, and the doctors ignored it." Meanwhile, Leslie sat in the staff room, not knowing what awaited her. Colleagues looked at her with respect, but some with judgment. "Well, Miss Baker made a whole scene," said one nurse. "She made a fool of Mr. King." "But she saved the governor," defended another. Catherine came to the hospital after learning about what was happening from Leslie. "Leslie, you did great. I'm proud of you." "Catherine, I might get fired." "So what then?" "We'll manage somehow." "But you did the right thing." The next day, the situation took an unexpected turn. A commission from the Regional Ministry of Health arrived at the hospital. An official investigation began. Leslie was called in to give an explanation. She told in detail about her observations, her attempts to bring them to the doctor's attention, and her decision to contact Mr. Gray. "And you didn't doubt the correctness of your diagnosis?" asked the commission chair. "I doubted, but all the symptoms pointed to compartment syndrome." "How did you know about this condition?" "I had read medical literature. A year ago I helped a patient find information about rare postoperative complications. I came across an article about this syndrome and got interested. A week after the surgery, everything in the hospital changed dramatically. The corridors were full of investigators, journalists, and prosecutors. Leslie went to work as if in a nightmare. Around her swirled a vortex of events that had started with her simple desire to help a dying man. In the office of Chief Dr. Mr. Flores, the investigation headquarters had gathered. Leslie was invited there as a key witness. "Leslie, please tell us again how you noticed the discrepancy in the diagnosis," asked Officer Simmons, a man about 40 with a tired face. "I just saw symptoms that didn't fit the picture of a ruptured spleen, jaundice of the sclera, absence of urination, and a specific nature of the pain." "How did you know about intra-abdominal pressure syndrome?" Leslie sighed. She had told this story several times already. "A year ago, we had a patient named Carl Mitchell, a factory locksmith. After intestinal surgery, he developed complications. His wife brought a tablet and asked for help finding information about his condition online. We searched together, and I came across American medical websites. There was an article about compartment syndrome. It wasn't needed then, but I remembered it." And this nurse read medical literature in her free time, clarified the Ministry of Health representative. "Yes, every evening I studied reference books and textbooks." "Why?" Leslie paused, choosing her words. "I wanted to be helpful. I dreamed of becoming a doctor, but circumstances turned out differently, so I tried to study medicine on my own." The investigator recorded every word, then moved on to the main question. "Leslie, During the investigation, serious abuse by Professor Mr. King was uncovered. Did you know about this? About what exactly? Purchases? Poor quality equipment? A corruption scheme? No, of course not. I was just doing my job. But you might have noticed that the equipment worked poorly. Leslie thought for a moment. Sometimes the ultrasound machine gave unclear images. The laparoscope occasionally malfunctioned. But I thought the equipment was just old. And you didn't connect the quality of diagnosis with the quality of equipment? I did. But what could I do? Who would listen to a nurse? At that moment, Robert Gray entered the office. He looked worried. Gregory Flores, sorry to interrupt, but something serious is happening. What exactly? Investigation committee vehicles have arrived at the hospital. They're arresting Mr. King. Everyone rushed to the windows. In the hospital courtyard, official cars with flashing lights were indeed parked. Professor Mr. King was being led out of the building in handcuffs. His face was pale, his gait unsteady. "My God," Leslie whispered. "That's it," the officer stated. "A criminal case has been opened. Article, accepting bribes on a particularly large scale." A murmur rose in the corridor. The medical staff discussed what was happening, unable to believe their eyes. Professor Mr. King, the luminary of medicine, arrested for bribery. "How much was stolen?" asked the chief physician. Preliminary estimates put it at about $1.5 million over the past year and a half. The scheme was simple. The company Post-Rednick supplied cheap Chinese equipment at inflated prices, and the difference was shared with Mr. King. And that equipment was knowingly substandard, which is why the doctors could not make an accurate diagnosis for the governor. Leslie listened, unable to believe it. So the governor nearly died not only because of a medical error but also due to Mr. King's greed. And now the most interesting part, the officer continued. "We confiscated all the equipment purchased by Mr. King. The examination showed ultrasound machines gave distorted images of internal organs, laparoscopes had defective optics, and surgical instruments were made of low-quality steel. So the doctors were knowingly working with faulty equipment," Mr. Gray clarified. "Exactly. And many recent diagnostic errors are related to this." Chief Dr. Mr. Flores turned pale. "How many patients were harmed because of this?" "We are still counting. But we are talking about dozens, if not hundreds, of cases." Leslie felt nausea rising. How many people could have suffered because of one man's greed? "Gregory Flores," the officer addressed the chief physician, "you will have to issue a public apology to those affected. Especially to Leslie." "Of course, Leslie," she said quietly. "The main thing is that this never happens again." "It won't, I promise." By evening, the story was in all the regional news bulletins. Journalists besieged the hospital, trying to interview Leslie. "How do you feel knowing you uncovered a corruption scheme?" reporters shouted. "I didn't uncover any schemes," Leslie replied. "I just wanted to help the patient." "But your actions led to Mr. King's arrest." "My actions were aimed at saving a life, the rest is for the investigation to handle." Meanwhile, the governor was rapidly recovering. When journalists visited him, he was firm. "Leslie Baker is a heroine. She not only saved my life but also helped expose a criminal scheme that harmed patients." "What do you plan to do next?" "The hospital will get modern, high-quality equipment. We will create the best surgical department in the region here." "And Leslie?" "Leslie will get a position that matches her knowledge and principles." At home, Catherine hugged her sister with tears in her eyes. "Leslie, I am so proud of you." Catherine, This all feels like a dream. Just a week ago, I was just a nurse no one listened to. And now you're a celebrity. A celebrity, Leslie smiled. I just want to work in peace. And you'll work in the new department with good equipment. The next day, Leslie arrived at the hospital early, before her shift started. The corridors were empty. Journalists hadn't arrived yet. She walked to the governor's ward. Good morning, Kyle Adams. Leslie. How are you? How are you handling all this fuss? Fine. And how do you feel? Much better. The doctors say I'll be discharged in a week. The governor was silent for a moment, then continued. Leslie, I've thought a lot over these days. You know, I've decided to establish a special award. An award? For medical workers who show integrity and professionalism. It will be called for loyalty to the Hippocratic Oath. That's wonderful. And you will be the first to receive this award. Leslie blushed. Thank you, but I'm not in it for the awards. I know. That's exactly why you deserve it. Robert Gray entered the ward during the morning rounds. Seeing Leslie, he smiled. Our heroine woke up early. Robert Gray, don't call me a heroine. I'm just a nurse. Just a nurse who saved a life and uncovered a criminal scheme. The governor looked at both of them. And do you know that Leslie will be the head nurse of the new department and Dr. Mr. Gray will be the chief? I know, and I'm very glad. It's important for me to work with principled people. Mr. Gray looked at Leslie in a special way, and she felt her cheeks flush. By the way, added the governor, I plan to allocate $5 million for the new department, the most modern equipment, renovations, and staff training. That's very generous, said Leslie. It's fair. So many lives have been lost due to poor quality equipment. It's time to fix that. After the rounds, Mr. Gray stopped Leslie in the hallway. Leslie, can we talk? Of course. I wanted to say, you showed remarkable courage. Not everyone would dare to stand against the system. I wasn't going against the system. I was trying to save a person. Aren't those the same thing? A system that doesn't listen to a nurse, even when she's right, needs to change. Leslie thought for a moment. Maybe I'm glad to be working with you, and not just as a colleague. He said the last words quietly, and Leslie understood the meaning behind them. There was definitely something more than just professional between them. I'm glad too, Robert Gray. Maybe you'd let me invite you to dinner after all this fuss. With pleasure. Leslie smiled. Life was really changing dramatically, and not just professionally. Meanwhile, Mr. King's case gained wide attention. The district attorney gave an interview where he described the scale of the corruption scheme. The hospital's damage amounted to about $5 million, he reported, but the moral damage to patients is immeasurable. Due to poor quality equipment, many diagnostic errors were made. Mr. King was sentenced to 7 years in prison and ordered to compensate for the damage caused. His nephew, who managed the supplier company, was sentenced to 5 years. The whole region learned the story of a simple nurse who wasn't afraid to tell the truth. Leslie was invited to appear on TV and in newspapers, but she preferred to stay out of the spotlight and focus on her work. I don't understand all this fuss, she told Catherine. I was just doing my job. Leslie, you saved the governor's life and uncovered a criminal scheme. That's a heroic deed. A heroic deed? Leslie shook her head. A heroic deed is when a soldier risks his life in battle. I just couldn't watch someone die. But the public thought differently. Leslie's story became a symbol of the fight against corruption in healthcare, an example of how one honest person can change the system. And ahead of Leslie were new changes, new opportunities, and perhaps new love. Life was taking a sharp turn, and this turn was leading to happiness. 3 months had passed since the events that had turned Leslie's life and the entire hospital upside down. The winter morning was frosty but sunny. Leslie stood by the window of the new surgical department, admiring the snow sparkling in the sunlight in the hospital yard. "Impressive, isn't it?" a familiar voice sounded behind her. Leslie turned around. The governor was approaching her, smiling. He had fully recovered and looked healthy and rested. "Kyle Adams, what a pleasant surprise. How are you?" "Great. I came to see the new department. I heard the official opening is today." Leslie nodded. Indeed, there was a ceremonial event today for the opening of the new surgical building. The $15 million allocated by the governor had been spent to the fullest advantage, the most modern equipment from Germany and Japan, top-notch renovations, new furniture. Everything was done at the highest level. "This is all thanks to you," Leslie said. "No, it's thanks to you. If not for your integrity, who knows how many more people would have suffered from poor medical equipment." They walked down the corridor of the new department. The walls were painted in pleasant pastel tones. Everywhere was bright and spacious. The rooms were equipped with the latest technology, monitors, devices, and life support monitoring systems. "How do you like working as head nurse?" the governor asked. "Wonderful, the team is great. Robert Gray is an excellent leader." Mentioning Mr. Gray made Leslie blush slightly. Over the past 3 months, their relationship had developed rapidly. What started as a working cooperation had grown into something more. "He's a good man," the governor noted, sensing her reaction. "And a good doctor." Robert Gray entered the operating block. In his white coat and confident stride, he looked impressive. "Kyle Adams, welcome to our new home." "Robert Gray, an impressive place. How are the operations going?" "Excellent. The new equipment allows us to perform the most complex surgeries. Last week, we performed a unique heart operation on a 5-year-old child. That was impossible before." Leslie listened to their conversation, watching Robert. Over these months, she had come to know him in many ways, as a doctor, as a leader, as a man. And she liked every side more and more. "By the way," the governor said, "there will be a surprise at the opening, especially for you." "A surprise?" Leslie was surprised. "I won't reveal the secret. You'll see." By noon, a large crowd had gathered at the entrance to the new department: journalists, doctors, regional representatives, and ordinary city residents. Everyone wanted to see the miracle created thanks to the integrity of a simple nurse. Leslie stood next to Robert on the makeshift stage. She wore a new blue dress that Catherine had bought especially for the occasion. "Nervous?" Robert whispered. "Terribly. I'm not used to such events." "You'll manage. You've handled much tougher things." The governor took the microphone. "Dear friends, today is a special day for our hospital and the entire region. We are opening a new surgical department equipped with the latest technology. But this department appeared thanks to one person, a young nurse who wasn't afraid to speak the truth when everyone else was silent. Leslie Baker." The applause grew even louder. Leslie felt her cheeks flush. "Leslie not only saved my life but also helped uncover a criminal scheme that harmed all the hospital's patients. Her integrity and courage deserve the highest praise." The governor paused. "That is why I proudly announced the establishment of the Regional Award for Loyalty to the Hippocratic Oath. This award will be given annually to medical professionals who demonstrate exceptional integrity and professionalism. He turned to Leslie. The first recipient of this award is Leslie Baker. The crowd erupted in applause. The governor handed Leslie a beautiful diploma and a commemorative medal. "Thank you," Leslie said into the microphone. "But I want to say that I was just doing my job. A nurse should care for patients. I did what I believed was right. That's exactly why you deserve this award." Someone shouted from the crowd. After the official part, the guests toured the new department. Leslie showed them the rooms, the operating theaters, and talked about the new equipment. "And this is our pride," she said, entering operating room number 1. "The latest surgical complex with a navigation system allows us to perform surgeries with millimeter precision." "Impressive," noted one of the doctors from a neighboring hospital. "Was the staff trained to work with such equipment?" "Of course, we spent 2 months interning at a German clinic. The equipment manufacturers fully trained all the specialists." The tour ended in the new department cafeteria. A festive table was set up for the event participants. Robert approached Leslie holding 2 glasses of champagne. "To our success," he said, offering her a glass. "To our success," Leslie repeated. They clinked glasses and took a sip of champagne. "Leslie," Robert said quietly, "I need to tell you something important." "Did something happen?" "No, on the contrary, everything is wonderful." And with that, he took a small box out of his pocket. "Robert," Leslie whispered. "Leslie, over these months you have become the most important person in my life. You're an amazing woman, principled, smart, kind. Will you marry me?" He opened the box. Inside was a beautiful diamond ring. Leslie felt tears of happiness welling up in her eyes. "Yes," she said. Robert slipped the ring onto Leslie's finger and kissed her tenderly. The guests nearby noticed what was happening and burst into applause. "Bitter! Bitter!" People shouted. Leslie and Robert kissed in the middle of the celebrating crowd. It was a moment of absolute happiness. Catherine, who had come to the celebration, approached them. "Leslie, I'm so happy for you." Catherine hugged her sister. "You deserve the very best." "Catherine, how are you? How's your studies?" "Great. And there's more news." "What?" "I was offered a named scholarship from the governor's fund, increased until the end of my studies." "Catherine, that's wonderful." "It's all thanks to you, little sister." In the evening, after the guests had left, Leslie and Robert walked through the hospital park. Snow was quietly falling in the light of the street lamps. "You know," Leslie said, 6 months ago I thought my life was already decided. I'd be a nurse until retirement, taking care of my sister. But now it seems like everything is just beginning," Robert smiled. "I have one more surprise." "Another one?" "Remember, you said you dreamed of becoming a doctor?" "Of course, I remember. I spoke with the dean of the medical institute. You will be admitted to the surgical residency program as a part-time student, so you can combine studies with work." Leslie stopped dead in her tracks. "Seriously?" "Absolutely serious. Your knowledge and experience are enough. Your nursing school diploma will be counted as basic education." "But what about work? The department? Will you manage both?" "I will help. We'll all help together." Leslie cried tears of happiness. "Thank you. Thank you for everything. I'm the one who should thank you for being in my life." They stood embraced in the falling snow, making plans for the future. Ahead lay a wedding, residency studies, work in the new department, a life full of meaning and joy. The new surgical department was already receiving its first patients. The modern equipment helped make accurate diagnoses and save lives. The very thing Leslie had fought for was becoming a reality. 2 months later, they had a modest wedding. Catherine was the maid of honor. The governor personally attended the celebration. Colleagues from the hospital gave the newlyweds a trip to Italy for their honeymoon. 6 months later, Leslie successfully passed her first residency exams. She balanced study and work, and although it was difficult, she was happy. Finally, she had the opportunity to become what she had always dreamed of, a doctor. Catherine graduated from university with honors and entered graduate school. The named scholarship allowed her to fully focus on her studies. "You know," Catherine once said, "when our parents died, I thought our life was over." But it turned out the best was still ahead, Leslie agreed. Sometimes the hardest moments are the beginning of something wonderful. And indeed, life gave Leslie an amazing gift. From a quiet nurse whom no one listened to, she became a respected specialist, a loving wife, and a future doctor. Her principles and courage not only saved the governor's life but also changed the entire healthcare system of the region. The new surgical department became the best in the area. Patients came here from neighboring regions. Young doctors did internships here. And Leslie's name forever entered the history of medicine as an example of how one person can change the world for the better. The story ended happily, as stories should, about people who are not afraid to act according to their conscience. Leslie proved that hierarchy and titles don't matter when a human life is at stake, and that truth spoken in time can save not only one person but change an entire system. The hospital adopted a new motto: "We listen to everyone, we value every opinion." And this motto was born thanks to the courage of one nurse who wasn't afraid to speak the truth.